On June 2nd, 1216, a remarkable event in English history took place. The French Crown Prince Louis was proclaimed King of England in Old St. Paul's Cathedral in London. For a year, he would reign as Louis I, temporarily controlling more than half of England. His claim was supported by the English barons, who had grown weary of their tyrannical king, John Lackland. Yet John was still alive and had no intention of surrendering his crown. Though strong in defense, his only real option was to flee. Welcome back to Lemmy history. I've seen all the comments about my voice, especially under the video about Elizabeth Woodville's funeral. Yes, that is my voice. An AI tool was used in that video to help with my accent, but it wasn't used in my reaction to Matthew Lewis or in the video about the disappeared Plantagenet prince. Those were entirely me. If you're curious, feel free to compare. I understand that some people dislike my voice, but I can't change it. If I use a fully AI-generated voice, I get criticized. If I use my natural voice, people complain about the accent and the statistics suffer. When I use this hybrid solution, at least the numbers are acceptable. I wish I could please everyone, but it's just not possible. Now back to our topic. By 1216, the Plantagenet dynasty was on the brink of collapse. John was despised by much of the nobility and his heirs were still children. The reason Louis ultimately failed to secure his rule ties back to an unexpected and somewhat ironic act by the embattled Plantagenet king, one that was in fact involuntary. As historian Catherine Hanley put it, John's dying was actually the most useful thing he could have done for the cause of his dynasty in England. However, this statement alone doesn't tell the whole story. Another key figure played a crucial role in ensuring the survival of the Plantagenets and the downfall of Louis, William Marshal. It is ironic that, at a time when most barons had to choose between holding lands in England or France, Marshal was one of the rare few who managed to maintain estates in both. We'll discuss his role and his actions at the end of this video. Louis's opportunity to become King of England can be traced back as early as 1204. By the end of June that year, the French king, Philip II Augustus, had conquered one of the Plantagenets' ancestral lands, Normandy. The fall of Chateau Gaillard was a particularly symbolic moment, an event marked by exceptionally brutal violence, even by medieval standards. I'll cover this in a separate video. At that time, John had already left France. Officially, he claimed he was only seeking support in England. However, a contemporary chronicle suggests that even his own time did not believe him. As he left, he told some of his men that he would go to England to seek advice and help from his barons and those in his household, and then make a speedy return. But the fact of the matter is that he took the Queen with him, so there were many who feared that his stay would be a very long one. He soon made ready his departure, for he had already sent his wagon train and all his effects ahead of him secretly. The truth is, John did try. In England, he actively sought support from his barons, intending to launch a campaign to drive Philip out of Normandy. He even appealed to them in person. However, by then, catastrophic news had already arrived from France. Rouen had surrendered without resistance, and it was John's fault. On June 1st, 1204, the city's commander had requested a 30-day truce so he could send word to the English king asking for reinforcements. If no help arrived, he would surrender to Philip. This was common practice at the time. John's response? He simply wrote back that the city should do what it thought best. Before the deadline even expired, Rouen opened its gates to the French monarch. John's failure to act did not sit well with his subjects in England. A contemporary, though admittedly hostile toward the king, recorded, "A very bad man was King John, crueler than any other. He brought shame to many of the great men of the land, which made him much hated." This shame extended to the reputation of the English barons as well. At the time, it was considered a disgrace for a Plantagenet king to be absent from France for too long, forced to remain in England instead. The barons shared in this dishonor as they were technically obligated to follow their king into battle, but they had little interest in joining John in what already looked like a doomed cause. They now faced a difficult choice regarding their estates in France. Should they pay homage to Philip, ensuring the security of their French holdings, but risking their standing in England? Or should they remain loyal to John, which would likely result in the confiscation of their French estates? Only one man managed to navigate this precarious situation successfully: William Marshal. He paid homage to Philip, yet remained too valuable to John for the English king to retaliate against him. Other barons attempted to solve the problem through their families. Some sent sons or brothers to France to swear loyalty to Philip and retain their lands while they themselves remained in England. However, in most cases, a choice had to be made. Either they left for France and lost their English holdings, or they stayed in England and forfeited their French possessions. For a man as naturally paranoid as John, this was an unbearable situation. Some barons had family members in France who had sworn allegiance to Philip. These men could not be trusted. Others had taken the place of former lords who had fled to France. These exiles would seize any opportunity to reclaim their lost estates in England. And then there were those who had remained in England but resented John for the loss of their family's French lands. Under immense pressure, John only made matters worse. He believed he could afford to offend Pope Innocent III, assuming the Pope's ongoing conflict with the French king would prevent serious consequences. But when he refused to accept the papal appointment of Stephen Langton as Archbishop of Canterbury, he found himself excommunicated and placed under interdict. This was the moment Philip had been waiting for. His own problems with the Pope had been relatively easy to resolve. Years earlier, he had defied the papacy by setting aside his second wife, Ingeborg of Denmark, and marrying Agnes Maria of Andex-Meranien instead. Ingeborg had spent 17 years imprisoned in various French castles, but by 1201 Agnes Maria had died. This allowed Philip to restore Ingeborg as queen, smoothing things over with the Pope. Philip's heir, Louis, was the son of his first wife, Isabella of Hainaut. Born in 1187, Louis was already an adult and had a son of his own, but Philip did not trust him. The young prince was ambitious, aggressive, and eager for military action. The situation in England presented the perfect opportunity. Philip proposed to the English barons that they make Louis their king. This would rid them of their incompetent ruler while giving Philip a way to occupy his restless heir. At the time, Louis was waging war in Flanders, a campaign his father had never wanted to escalate so intensely. Meanwhile, Louis's wife, Blanche of Castile, a granddaughter of Henry II, was enthusiastic about the idea of becoming Queen of England. After all, Philip was still relatively young. She could be waiting years before becoming Queen of France. With England under interdict, even the Pope lent his support to the idea. He urged Louis to cross the Channel and claim the crown. John, who had already exhausted every trick he knew to extract more and more money from his subjects, was now on the brink of civil war. Then, however, he made a brilliant move. In May 1213, he not only wrote to the Pope announcing his capitulation and acceptance of Langton as archbishop, but he also took an even more dramatic step. He signed over all of England to the Pope, expressing his hope of receiving it back as a papal fief. Innocent III was delighted and eagerly agreed. A contemporary chronicle reveals just how much this decision benefited John. The king provided wisely for himself and his people by this deed, although to many it seemed ignominious and a monstrous yoke of servitude. For matters were in such extremity, there was perhaps no other way of evading the impending danger. For from the moment he put himself under apostolic protection and made his kingdom part of St. Peter's patrimony, there was no prince who would dare attack him or invade his lands. The passage already hints that the Pope understood what was now expected of him. Innocent not only commanded the English barons to remain loyal to John, but also issued a direct order to Philip. Neither he nor Louis was to cross the Channel or set foot in England. Philip's reaction was nothing short of fury. He had already invested £60,000 in the campaign at the Pope's own behest. But his outrage made no difference. The plan was over before it had even begun. For Philip, the situation only worsened. John had consolidated his power base and was now preparing to reclaim his lost territories. He had secured two powerful allies, Emperor Otto and Ferron of Flanders, both eager to fight against the French king. Even some French barons chose to side with him. In contrast, Philip and Louis stood alone. The Allied forces divided their strategy. John sent his half-brother, William Longsword, to join Otto and Ferrand in battle against Philip, while he himself led a separate army. Their plan was for both forces to invade France simultaneously, one from the north and the other from the south. Notably, William Marshal did not participate, and John struggled to recruit troops in England. Despite these challenges, Philip had no choice but to divide his own army. He led one half against Otto, Ferrand, and William Longsword, while Louis was tasked with confronting John directly. Although outnumbered, the French forces had one decisive advantage: a well-organized hierarchical command structure. In contrast, the Allies lacked clear coordination. As a result, the campaign quickly turned into a disaster for John and his supporters. Both Louis and Philip emerged victorious with the crushing defeat at Bouvines, where William, Otto, and Ferrand were decisively beaten, marking an utter catastrophe. With no other option, John fled back to England. The Plantagenets had definitively lost their dominance over the French crown, a position they would not come close to reclaiming for generations. In England, John's situation was scarcely better. Seizing the opportunity, the new Scottish king, Alexander II, launched raids into English territory, knowing John was too weak to resist. At the same time, the English king continued pressing the barons for ever-increasing financial support. It was too much. A large faction of the barons rebelled. John's usual intimidation tactics suddenly failed. His loyal soldiers were already ravaging parts of the kingdom under the pretext of restoring royal authority. Overwhelmed by superior military force, John was ultimately compelled to sign the Magna Carta, guaranteeing the barons their rights. However, the king had no intention of honoring it. As soon as the ink was dry, he effectively revoked it. Turning to the Pope, his liege lord, John secured further support. The Pope in turn annulled the Magna Carta and threatened any lord who insisted on its enforcement with excommunication. In response, Robert Fitzwalter and Sire de Quincy travelled to Paris in September 1215. Eustace de Vesci and several other rebels also sought out the Scottish king. In the French capital, the barons formally offered the English crown to Louis. They recalled that Philip had once pursued this very claim himself, so they fully expected his approval. Yet Philip's reaction was surprisingly reserved. Vanity may have played a role. Perhaps he wished to be offered the crown himself, only to pass it to his son as a grand gesture. More significantly, however, the Pope's involvement now complicated matters. Philip insisted that Louis present his case before him and the French Privy Council, explaining why he had a legitimate right to the English throne. Louis was already well prepared for this request, suggesting prior coordination with his father. He presented three legal arguments in support of his claim. First, John had forfeited his right to rule by violating the coronation oath established since Henry I, which obligated the king to protect the barons' rights. Second, through his wife, he had a legitimate dynastic claim to the English throne. Third, the Pope had no authority in the matter. The last point earned Louis an excommunication, but he was unfazed. Philip played a double game. Officially, he deemed his son's arguments insufficient and refrained from formally endorsing the campaign. However, he did not forbid it either. He allowed Louis to proceed on the condition that he finance the expedition himself. As a result, Louis was unable to recruit as many men as he had hoped. Still, he managed to gather 1,200 knights and around 4,000 infantrymen to accompany him to England. The invasion was set in motion in December 1215. A fierce storm in the Channel nearly turned the campaign into a disaster, but ultimately the fleet was only temporarily separated without suffering any losses. At first, things went well for the French in England. Even prominent noblemen joined Louis, including William Marshal the Younger, son of the legendary William Marshal. However, suspicions have since arisen that father and son may have been playing a double game. London aligned itself with the rebels and the French crown prince of its own accord. In front of Old St. Paul's Cathedral, Louis was proclaimed king. However, he was never formally crowned. Traditionally, the Archbishop of Canterbury officiated coronations, but in this case he refused. Langton, in principle, was open to the idea, but there was one insurmountable issue. Louis had been excommunicated. This barred him from participating in religious ceremonies, including coronation rites. Though he could have ignored this restriction, he feared his reign might be deemed illegitimate due to a procedural flaw. Despite the lack of a coronation, Louis exercised full royal authority. He appointed a chancellor, corresponded with the Scottish king, who was playing his own double game, and distributed lands. In every practical sense, he was king, save for the official ceremony. Meanwhile, the war raged with full force. Chronicler Roger of Wendover paints a grim picture of the conflict. The whole surface of the earth was covered with these limbs of the devil like locusts, who assembled from remote regions to blot out everything from the face of the earth, from man down to his cattle. For, running about with drawn swords and open knives, they ransacked towns, houses, cemeteries and churches, robbing everyone and sparing neither women nor children. The king's enemies, wherever they were found, were imprisoned in chains and compelled to pay a heavy ransom. Even the priests, while standing at the very altars, with the cross of the Lord in their hands, clad in their sacred robes, were seized, tortured, robbed, and ill-treated. John largely relied on guerrilla tactics, avoiding open field battles and focusing on starving his enemies of resources. This made him deeply unpopular, as another contemporary account suggests. They made great slaughter as they did everywhere they went, sparing neither age, nor sex, nor condition, nor the clergy. The devastation was visible even from London, as smoke from the destruction filled the air. The brutal realities of the war became evident during the siege of Rochester Castle. Barons loyal to Louis had captured the castle, cutting off a critical route for John. As a result, he was forced into a siege. Following custom, the local population sought refuge within the fortress walls. However, just as commonly practiced, the garrison soon expelled those who were not useful for defense, women, children, and the elderly, to conserve food supplies. Normally, a besieging army would allow these non-combatants to pass through unharmed, as they posed no threat. But this time, John made a chilling decision. He ordered that every person emerging from the castle have their hands and feet cut off. To him, they were not innocent civilians. They had chosen to flee into the stronghold of his enemies, and for that they were to be punished. Louis himself was ruthless with his enemies, but such actions worked to his advantage, and that was crucial. Tensions were beginning to stir within his army. The French barons who had followed him expected their share of the spoils, while the English lords who supported him had their own ambitions. Resentment was already brewing. William Marshal the Younger, for instance, was angered after being passed over for an important office. For the time being, however, the camp remained united by their hatred of John, but this fragile unity shattered in October 1216. John had already complained of illness in September, and by early October his condition had worsened to the point where he could no longer ride and had to be transported in a cart. With his strength fading, he managed one final act, writing to the new Pope, Honorius III, asking him to protect his heir. Shortly after, he succumbed to dysentery. At that moment, William Marshal, this time the father, acted without hesitation. He arranged for the immediate coronation of John's 9-year-old son, Henry III. Formalities did not concern him. There was no proper location available, nor even a crown. Instead, a tiara was used as a makeshift substitute provided by Henry's mother, who soon returned to France, never to set foot in England again. Marshal was determined to move quickly. The sooner the better. His biographer records him as saying, he was appointed regent, and his first act would prove devastating to Louis's ambitions. Up until that moment, Louis controlled more than half of England, largely because the barons despised John and wanted their rights secured. Marshal responded decisively. He reinstated the Magna Carta. Then he presented the nobility with a choice. Would they continue to rebel against an innocent 9-year-old king who now guaranteed their rights? Or would they side with a foreign prince whose followers were clearly after their lands? Louis's support crumbled like ice in the sun. His time in England would likely have ended then and there if not for the bold intervention of his wife, Blanche of Castile. In Paris, she dared to do what no one else had. She directly petitioned Philip for official support. While we have no exact record of this exchange, a contemporary source presents it in a dramatic dialogue. She went to the king saying, "Are you going to let my lord, your son, die in a foreign country? Sire, in God's name, he ought to reign after you. Send him what he needs, at least from the revenues of his own lands." "Certainly, Blanche, I will do no such thing," replied the king. "No, sire?" "No," said the king. "In the name of God," said my Lady Blanche, "then I know what I will do." "And what will you do?" asked the king. "By the grace of the Mother of God, I have fine sons by my lord. I will pawn them all and see what I can get for them." Then she parted furiously from the king, and when he saw her go, he knew that she meant what she said. He called her back and said, "Blanche, I will give you my treasure, as much as you want, and you can do with it whatever you wish, but I will not send any to him." And a great deal of treasure was delivered to my Lady Blanche, and she sent it to her lord. A massive fleet loaded with soldiers and gold set sail, but it was slow and cumbersome, just as William Marshal had anticipated. In response, he assembled a fleet of smaller, more maneuverable ships and recruited experienced sailors familiar with the waters. Then he executed a brilliant ruse. He knew that the French fleet carrying Louis's gold and silver would avoid direct confrontation to protect its precious cargo. Marshal tricked the French into believing they had successfully bypassed him and could now sail safely up the Thames to London. Confident in their escape, they let down their guard, but Marshal's ships, faster in these familiar waters, soon caught up. He forced them into battle in the narrow confines of the Thames, where the size of the French ships became a disadvantage rather than an asset. The English fleet overwhelmed them, sinking their attackers and cutting off Louis's final hope. For Louis, all was lost. Yet Marshal, ever the strategist, chose not to demand surrender, but instead to negotiate peace. He understood that humiliating the French crown prince might provoke Philip into intervening. After all, the French king could still claim he had never fully supported the invasion. A reasonably honorable peace settlement would ensure that Philip did not change his stance. The language of the peace treaty was remarkable. Louis renounced his claim to the English throne, but in return he received 10,000 marks of silver, equivalent to a quarter of the English crown's annual income. Crucially, the wording of the treaty allowed England to erase Louis' reign from its official history. By renouncing his claim rather than his throne, England could maintain the fiction that he had never truly been king. At the same time, Marshal subtly acknowledged that the English barons did, in fact, have the right to offer the crown, recognizing that Louis's claim had been valid in its own way. A contemporary chronicler reflected on this dramatic reversal of fortune. It was truly a miracle that the heir of the King of France, having advanced so far into the heart of the country with a great army and having succeeded in occupying so much of it, helped by the barons, and had taken it so quickly, was forced to abandon this kingdom without hope of recovering it. It is because the hand of God was not with him. Louis soon found another battlefield where he could indulge his violent ambitions. By this time, the conflict against the Albigensians had been elevated to the status of a papal crusade, and he had something to prove. Even before his departure for England, he had been involved in the campaign, then still under the leadership of Simon de Montfort. That name, Simon de Montfort, would come to haunt Henry III in the years to come. But that is a story for another time. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe to help my channel.